It's a privilege to share the stage with a diverse spectrum of researchers, activists, organizers, and thank you very much to our translators, moderators, and event organizers. And thank you for coming on such a beautiful morning. It's great to share some role models at the university who share my view that science has a rich potential to transform the world that we live in, and who work in a paradigm in which science has the power to act on a deeply unequal and extractive world. We're indebted to our teachers, our students, our intellectual and political ancestors for forging ways to think, and I'll be charting some genealogies this morning. Channeling perspectives from my discipline, anthropology, I'm going to try and just make a few very simple points. My contribution intervenes in the discussion about utopia to show how anthropological perspectives can conjure utopian visions for a liberated, sustainable, redistributive, egalitarian future, in spite of much evidence to the contrary. In a nutshell, and in utopian spirit, the anthropological archive is populated by innumerable different configurations of how human societies have organized themselves, how they've organized production, reproduction, and redistribution. This archive invites us to recover alternative social formations outside of a conventional account of human social evolution, and to see transcripts of egalitarianism and mutuality. These tiny seeds of a more egalitarian future might, however, need quite a lot of digging out, careful transplantation, and painstaking nurturing in order to realize any new political formation. But first, why anthropology? What does it mean to bring an anthropological perspective? Modern anthropology moved from a speculative theorization of human development to grounded, empirically informed studies of human societies in situ. We produced monographs, accounts that documented scientifically the social, political, economic, and spiritual lives of different peoples of the world, or rather, people in the colonial territories in which European and American anthropologists had a privileged access to their economy and society. Strands of anthropology have worked cross-culturally, comparing social structures and seeking out universals of the human condition, while other strands have focused on a close analysis of social institutions and practices. The power dynamic implicit in the relationships that facilitated these forms of knowledge production faced a series of critical challenges through the 20th century. Notably the independence movements and decolonization of much of Asia and Africa, as well as fundamental critiques from Marxist, feminist, and post-colonial theories, which all de-centered anthropology's supposedly objective position as the font of knowledge about non-Western societies. Having partially digested this critique and brought into our anthropological canon, our literature, a number of these critical positions, anthropologists also began conducting work in developed capitalist societies in the imperial core. Meanwhile, anthropological theory has to some extent swung back to offering grand analyses of the human condition more broadly. Thinking critically and cross-culturally about human science, human social and political organization at a global scale, and faced with a crisis of objectivity in anthropology, as well as polycrises that we face as a species, we realize how limited our forms of knowledge are. Drawing particularly today on the work of David Graeber, and co-opting some indigenous utopian visions from my first-hand fieldwork in Southeast India, I outlined the grounds to be cautiously optimistic about the potential for human liberation. Anthropologists embed themselves in societies. We practice ethnography, a methodology of slow immersion, participation, and continuous learning within communities or social institutions that are to some degree unfamiliar to the researcher. We are trained to speak to everyone, not just to the powerful and influential. We closely observe, document, analyze, and seek to understand how societies are held together, what animates transformation and conflict, and how social processes are experienced. Some anthropologists suggest that this methodology is already a potentially revolutionary praxis, because the methodological toolkit of ethnography generates ways of seeing and being in the world that challenge the socialization that we have already had as researchers. This revolutionary potential is latent in all research that opens up to rethink the very categories through which we understand the world. Anthropology, for example, has debunked our Eurocentric ideas of our own individuality. We've debunked assumed norms of family relationships. We've dismissed human economic rationality and even questioned the primacy of capital in organizing the world. I know, who would have thought that? As we step or swim out into different societies and gather data firsthand, empirically, with all of our human imperfections, what do you imagine we find out there? Across a vast array of contexts, ethnographic analysis has documented the human propensity to construct elaborate hierarchies of exploitation, inequality, oppression, and domination. The past 100 years, we might say, of sociological and anthropological research have been dominated by an emphasis on structures, hierarchies, processes of opposition, configurations of difference, inequality, and power. And this aligns with a 20th century of war, colonization, decolonization, more war, post-war optimism, while wars were prosecuted in faraway places. The Cold War, nuclear armament, the end of the war, the fall of the USSR, the globalization of a liberal capitalist economic orthodoxy to all corners of the world as we approach the millennium. Should I carry on? I promise to be optimistic at the beginning. We witnessed the return of history on 9/11, a new legitimization for a war on terror, a war predominantly targeted against Muslims. We moved through the 2000s. We had multiculturalism, which requires a critique that corresponds to that Rupa Vishwanath gave us yesterday morning on liberal anti-racism. We returned to the boom culture, to the peak times of neoliberalism, during which a British anthropologist, Parvati Raman, was conducting fieldwork in London, working among people who wore Che Guevara t-shirts, a symbol that went viral before the internet. She described how Che's image, emptied of a real political content, can do little more than invoke a nostalgia for a history that might have been otherwise, whilst pointing to an apolitical present. Raman's interlocutors found it easier, she hints, to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. Yet they sported this arresting image, signifying revolution and a dream for a radically different future, while at the same time self-consciously aware of the emptiness of this t-shirt, a mass-produced commodity. For Raman, the concept of utopia is about the capacity to assert truths and universals against the existing social order. It offers a critique of the present through an imagination of the future possibility. But now it seems, as she writes, we need to imagine utopia in the absence of a radical challenge, a reconciliation to capitalism by left-wing intellectuals, and the abandonment of an idea of an alternative social order. We arrived at the 2008 financial crash, the Occupy movement, the politics of austerity and financialization, the strikes, the inequality exacerbated and produced through further opening up of real estate and property markets, through the COVID pandemic, and the horrific unmasking we continue to see in the genocide in Gaza, that unveiled for those who don't already know that the values of sovereignty, self-determination, respect for a rules-based order and international law were never designed to be universal. This, of course, feeds the current Zeitenwende, in which military spending is paired with further austerity. The war economy supersedes collective common resources. Contemporary anthropological research straddles obligations to engage with these processes of neoliberalism, declining welfare systems, and environmental degradation, while maintaining its established theoretical preoccupations with hierarchy, social structure, and exposés of our social institutions. This is what Sherry Ortler calls dark anthropology, all the interesting and troubling stuff. Please have a look through recent journals in anthropology. They are proliferated by questions of power, technology, racism, migration, structural violence. You'll also find more esoteric stuff, more esoteric questions on ontology, semiotics, affect. There's a tendency for ethnographers, as well as ground down and disillusioned Marxists, scientists, and perhaps anyone who cares, to tune into this disturbing reality that human progress has created so far. And based on the 2.5 pages I've got through already, we might well despair. Yet, taking a long view of human social development, we realise these phenomena are not permanent. In the wider schema, these are short exposures. Our contemporary moment of late neoliberal capitalism, authoritarian populism, and techno-feudalism is temporary. To paraphrase the remarkably ethnographic poet Kay Tempest, when the dust clears, the next species to evolve won't even know we've disappeared. Perhaps less eye-catching in our anthropological record are studies of human flourishing, of the good life. Often these are set within anthropological theories of morality and ethics. Research on the good has been critiqued as inherently conservative, out of step with the discursive shift towards human suffering. And yet, we have these accounts of the original affluent societies of the Kalahari, the brutal but well-resourced Guarani tribes, the prosperous renouncers of the Jain community in Western India. In each case, we may not view their wealth or pattern of life as desirable, but these are all societies in which we believe that people did well, according to their own logics of welfare and success. So 3 decades after Faye Harrison called for an anthropology of liberation, I now draw on the toolbox of David Graeber to unpick the contributions of anthropologists and their interlocutors to envisioning egalitarian futures. Is the speed okay? Can I speed up?
Maybe not up.
Not up. Thank you. As I go, I want to alert us to one potential misinterpretation of my talk. We must not read my next intervention as a fetishization and a romanticization of an indigenous subject, of their politics, of their social structure, I'm not calling into existence imagined harmony before industrialization, modernization, capitalism and colonialism. Rather, I'm suggesting alternative frames to conceptualize how society have always been engaged with questions of social cohesion, redistribution, and progress. Has not been linear, but rather contingent. David Graeber's economic anthropology, especially Debt, the first 5,000 years, foregrounds principles of human sociology, including everyday communism, the basic form of reciprocity that people need to have any collaboration in their lives. As an elementary form of dependence, of relationality, thinking closely and anthropologically about human social life forces us to see the existence of an absolute minimum requirement of cooperation and mutual aid in order for any groups to cohabit, to trade, to interact, even to go to war. In Debt, which is also available in German, Graeber explores how coinage, trade, markets, and capitalism came to dominate the world. He highlights the rise to unquestioned salience of a particular morality of economic action that conspires to produce a highly financialized, neoliberalized global order associated with the forms of exploitation we now inhabit. Debts become morally binding. One has to pay one's debts in a way which is totally out of proportion to the first principles of human relatedness. These processes, Graeber suggests, critically, are not inevitable. Other histories might have unfolded. Elsewhere, Graeber takes up Weberian ideas about bureaucracy to show that hierarchies of specialization and professionalization are barriers to the imagination of other social configurations, dead zones of the imagination. The Dawn of Everything, co-authored with David Wengrow, an archaeologist, and published posthumously, also available in German translation as Die lange Vergangenheit der menschlichen Freiheit. For the tape, I'm not taking commission. These are all freely available on the internet. David was an anarchist. They lay out the tapestry of alternative conceptualizations of human development outside the assumed premises of Western political theory. We need not inhabit either a Hobbesian relation of domination or a Rousseauian pristine condition mediated by the social contract. Instead, offering anthropological and archaeological evidence, they craft a speculative history of human civilization. Yes, this is a speculative history, but one that provokes us to recognize the speculative nature of all meta-narratives, of our hierarchies as natural systems of inequalities. The Dawn of Everything demonstrates that human beings routinely resist being dominated, even as they often dominate each other. It shows that self-organization, voluntary association, and mutual aid are vital forces in our social history. At some points, Wengrow and Graeber overstretch their evidence base. They want to establish not only that the human record reveals extraordinary accounts of coexistence, collaboration, and mechanisms to resist hierarchies, they go further to posit the existence of developed, city-like settlements, free of rulers. They document Teotihuacan polities of 50 to 150 AD, Thank you. During this period, civic identity was apparently based on monument building and human sacrifice, indicating highly ritualistic social hierarchies. This social organisation required hordes of labour and was governed by a warrior aristocracy in a city-state and by hereditary nobles. However, according to the archaeological data, from the 3rd and 4th centuries onwards, there was a total upheaval and reprioritization of resources to house hundreds of nuclear families in evenly sized compounds, each with finely plastered walls and internal drainage systems. These homes, mapped by René Milon, who understood they could be a form of mass social housing, provided a framework in which a multi-ethnic population could cohabit in large residential groups. Regardless of the specifics of the archaeological debate, I insist we can have both interpretations, both a rigorous discussion of each example, but also a wider vision of imagining the possibility that humans behaved differently from how we assume we have. For this, I'll give a contemporary example from our city of Göttingen. We inhabit a left-wing, intellectually active hub of progressive scientific activity. We have community networks for mutual aid here. We have a vegetarian Mensa. We have green cycling plans. We have strong migrant support networks. We have resource sharing networks. We have extensive not-for-profit housing associations. We even have a whole weekend of unbelievable utopias in our university. At the same time, we are class divided, intrinsically hierarchical. We are a conurbation of people where some are isolated, unwell, cancelled, ground down by their encounters with a racist bureaucracy, where people are routinely exploited for their labour across manual, technical, educational, service-providing and knowledge-producing industries. These two images of our city must be allowed to coexist. They don't contradict each other.
Thomas?
Yeah.
I must ask you to close in a minute.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, to close, the abiding message I want to pull out from my anthropological critique is that we modern people, especially the scientists, unionists, organisers, socialists and students in these overdeveloped pockets, we may well have been socialised to consider inequality and domination as inevitable, as natural. While by and large, empirical studies do bear this out, there are also frames of reference that give us resources to imagine other social histories. We can recenter the freedoms elaborated in the dawn of everything, to move, to disobey commands, and to establish new social formations. These are three that are picked out by Wengrow and Graeber, and I think we should take them seriously. I trust you all and the following speakers to engage with them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for your views. I think we all appreciate it. I would like now to start the discussion. You can queue at the microphone over there. I think we should again collect 3 talks from the audience and then give Thomas some time to answer on that. Of course, you can speak in German. I don't know how we will organize the translation for Thomas. think the colleague over there will translate for you, Thomas.
Great, thank you. Great.
Okay. Maybe I speak in English and then it's more easy for the other two. Yeah. So thanks a lot for the very interesting talk. And I think it's interesting to see how different communities can develop in history, even in the example, if I understood correctly, from in the ancient Mexican, was a total change in the society after an uprise. Yeah? So it was, if I understood correctly, it was the result of a struggle. And that also came up in my mind when I hear you speaking about Göttingen. You speak about coexistence. I don't believe in coexistence as long as you have conditions where class contradictions are reproduced. And that's for me the big question to you. What are the economical, if we need to somehow live and create our food and produce our food and the things, and as long as we don't have conditions where we don't reform class contradictions, you always will reproduce also in Göttingen power and oppression of alternative projects. We see that now with the Haus der Kultur, yeah, they don't want to have it anymore. Yeah. Also other places, the social center, yeah, this very nice idea of a progressive project with a hill center and with a lot of communal meetings. It's fighted from the city government. They don't want to have it. They want to have a commercial project. So I think it's, for me, Utopia can only happen if we can overcome these conditions which reproduce classes. And that needs, for me, something which is more related to enable a power of the working class over all these conditions and tendencies which recreate class conditions. So it needs a phase of a, as Karl Marx told it, dictatorship of the proletarian, which is not the dictatorship of a party. You have this very ugly picture of Brezhnev and Honecker, which is really horrible. Yeah, it's a dictatorship of an organized group of workers to overcome these conditions. Yeah? And that's for me I just want to, because we want to have discussion, yeah? So that's for me the contradiction I have to your idea how a community can persistent develop, because it must have a phase of, let's say, overcome all the conditions where class conditions can be recreated. Thanks.
Thanks, question.
Das Stichwort Schulden einfach ist mir so in den Sinn gekommen, dass man in so einer Schuldenfalle steckt, und dann fiel mir ein, das ist für mich immer wieder aufgetaucht mit den ganzen sozialen Problemen, auch den Kriegsproblemen, die wir haben, dass wir immer mehr verschuldet werden. Deutschland hatte eine Zeit mit einem enormen Wirtschaftszonen, trotzdem waren wir verschuldet. Ob die Schuldenfalle, ist das zu laut?
Ein bisschen langsam, das ist für ihn einfacher.
Entschuldigung, ich bin bei leider sehr schnell, man muss mich manchmal bremsen.
Das mache ich.
Dass diese Schuldenfalle, in der auch die sogenannten reichen westlichen Länder dennoch gelandet sind, ob das ein System ist, um uns an so einer Laufleine zu halten. Ich denke an etwas, was in der Bibel immer stand. Dieser Satz hat mich immer sehr beeinflusst. Dass die Wucherer und Geldwechsler aus dem Tempel geworfen wurden. Und bis ins Mittelalter war es verboten, also einen Geldhandel zu machen. Also so Wucherhandel zu betreiben. Und die Einzigen, die das machen durften, das waren die jüdischen Menschen, weil das bei denen halt nicht, die hatten keine Bibel wie wir, wo da was drin stand. Und das muss einen Grund gehabt haben. Und dann plötzlich haben wir dieses abgegeben und haben auch im Grunde genommen wirklich so einen Geldhandel betrieben. Das hat die Kriege ermöglicht. Ich glaube, da sind die Fugger auch, ich weiß nicht, ob sie Fugger waren, da sind auch reich geworden, dass die Kriegswirtschaft mit der Geldwirtschaft zusammenhängt und dass das Geld entkoppelt ist von dem, was produziert wird. Da hatten wir ja einen super Vortrag, dass mehr Aktienpapiere und Wertpapiere da sind als Wertschöpfung. Das heißt, wir arbeiten uns zu Tode und da oben sitzen welche, die haben lauter Wertpapiere. Wir können gar nicht so viel arbeiten, wie die in Gegenwert haben. Ne? Ob man da dieses System nicht durchbrechen muss. Und dass der Schlüssel ist, um das ganze System zum Zusammenbruch zu bringen. Weil ich habe immer so das Bild, es gibt ein Streichholz, das Ganze ist ein Streichelgebäude. Und dann denke ich mir immer, wenn ich den Streichholz erkenne, ich werde ihn rausziehen und dann bricht alles zusammen. Irgendwo muss der Streichholz sein.
Thank you very much for these contributions. I think we should give Thomas some time to answer to these.
Thanks, Ali. That's perfect. Okay, so sure, thank you. Thank you for two nice, substantial questions to think about. The question about debt, they are exactly the processes that are discussed in that text, and it reminded me of one of the points I didn't quite cover, but one of the indigenous interlocutors that is documented in the book I referenced is an Iroquois-speaking intellectual called Candiaronk, and he has a reflection on European modernity and civilization. And he responds to French colonial officers or I suppose settlers. It was in northwestern America, by showing this complete incapability of understanding how their society could operate as highly unequal and class stratified. So the idea that some people are allowed to become poor, some people are allowed to become destitute, is a totally antisocial principle, right? It doesn't make any sense that we should develop societies in which people can be homeless. So your question about allowing the creation of interest is really on the point of this talk, and I think the history of these processes by which the real economy is decoupled from the economy that is like managed by experts is precisely the process that's documented in Graeber's work. And you also mention, with the help of Ali's translation, I was catching, I think, most of your question. You also mentioned an intentionality. I mean, there is a long discourse about that within economic anthropology, how far we can attribute intentionality to processes of capitalist extraction, of the people who create debts, of institutions. Do banks have an intentionality? Most of us would say yes. They are instrumentalizing economic reality in order to produce wealth and exploit other people. But there's also arguments that say that individuals have intentionality and social institutions and social processes do not. Christian's critique is like very important critique to think about this body of literature that I've tried to summarize in a very short time. Marxist critique of this text has been quite strong. That they, especially in the moment that it got published in 2021. People felt that it was out of step with contemporary debates even in Marxist anthropology, let alone Marxist theory and organizing more broadly. There is this naive utopianism in the text, but I guess the question to kind of try to, channel my ancestor, David Graeber, and it's always hard to answer on behalf of another author, but I guess I'm in that role at the moment. He would flip the question round and ask us, surely what we are doing today, is this not imagining some sort of utopia outside of those structures? Because within the room we are also class divided, right? But we are still here, we are still doing it, we are still having this conversation. So of course we shouldn't and yeah, on the point of the Teotihuacan transformation, the data is not crystal clear on whether there was an uprising or a violent struggle, because the archaeological record shows these two kind of imprints of housing and allocation of resources. One which indicates a deeply hierarchical society based on human sacrifice and extraction of labor, and another one that indicates, as those archaeologists have interpreted it, a more egalitarian cohabiting settlement. So we're projecting back, but we're also projecting onto our own society. We're also choosing to interpret the world that we live in, as one that's organized according to a division of labor and to the class consciousness that I think most of us would observe. But I think it's important to think of these things as constructs, as narratives that help us understand it. But I guess you're introducing this challenge to that idea, that there is a materiality to that there is an absolute economic primacy, and that is a tension within this work. And I guess within this body of literature, that tension is exactly there, that there are these narratives, social constructions, and interpretive frames of human history, but at the same time, these are also scholars that take very seriously the empirical, material reproduction of human societies. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your answers.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there some more contributions from the audience? Otherwise, I would like to ask a question, if I'm allowed. Could you enlighten or be more concrete about the role you specified for the indigenous people? Because I sometimes think that we should look on these people and see what they are achieving with their form of society. And I think we should look there and see what we can take out of this to enhance our way of life. Could you be more specific about the role you designate to these people?
Yeah, that's interesting. I would be more specific only if I was able to ask which indigenous people. Because indigenous people are not a homogeneous group of people. They have so many different ways of organizing their resources. The longer version of this lecture contains an assessment of literature from India on Adivasis, who some scholars believe have a more egalitarian way of distributing resources. In my own work, I've documented the way that traditional shifting, cultivating economies of Adivasis in Southeast India operate in a way where resources are shared much more locally between kinship groups, between families, that the produce of the forest and the produce of this very labor-intensive type of cultivation are shared very directly and closely. And there is no accumulation of wealth in that society. There are, at most, we have grain stores. At most, we have piles of dried corn and millet. And that type of cultivation pattern leads to an analysis that social hierarchies don't arise. But at the same time, I will also emphasize in my analysis of those societies that these are patriarchal societies that have clear distinctions based on your age set, based on your generation, clear hierarchies of different lineages within the society and clan groups, and strict patterns of endogamy and constraints on people's marriage choices. So I think we can do this work of picking and choosing from different indigenous constructs, and I think we should. That's in a way what these authors are doing. But we don't have to, yes, we do have to be specific about which societies we are talking about. And I think it would need a bit more time to elaborate the kind of egalitarian practices in, for example, the South American Amazonian tribal communities compared to others. So yeah, it's an interesting question, and thanks for asking me to be more specific. I think that the key point I want to emphasize, though, is that we can't assume indigenous societies have necessarily some kind of lesson for us, right? I'm more thinking about indigenous societies as having their own sets of what is good, because we can't evaluate those practices according to our social beliefs and values. Because, well, let's for example say that we have already this understanding that we exist in a class society, and that we have that the economic distribution of resources is the primary organizing factor of how we exist, as Christian explained. With that framework in mind, we can't then, in good faith, go into a hypothetical indigenous community and I think pick and choose what we take then. Hope that makes sense.
So, thanks a lot. Now I have a question.
Oh, great.
So what I got from your talk was that these indigenous cultures are showing that it's not in our genes to have hierarchies and so on. And so I think this is very valuable in the time we're living in, because they are always telling us that the human being is egoistic. By its biology, it's bringing up hierarchies, it's bringing up exploitation and everything. And but what Friedrich Engels said was that the production and reproduction, the state of production and reproduction, is defining how the society is evolving. And so that makes sense if we say the indigenous cultures don't have these hierarchies because they are not on this level of production and reproduction. But if we look at an international scale, we have this internationalized, highly productive, industrialized production. And that would mean for us, we need a society where the people are living in an international solidarity way together, also in unity with the nature and everything, and we have a level of science to do this, we have a level of technology to do this. The only thing that is preventing us from this is the structure of power, is the question who has the capital, who's owning these factories, who's owning this logistics and the media and everything. And I think that's what I get from your talk. If we want to come into bring the way of society in a unity with the way we could produce today and with the problems we have in nature, that would mean we have to overcome these structures of power that we have in capitalism. Question is, what do you think about this? But we have not 2 minutes left.
I would say yes. I think at that meta-historical level, thinking about cycles of production and the accumulation of power within a certain class of capitalists, I agree we have to, the point of the talk is to say yes, we have to overthrow that power structure and find other ways of organizing ourselves. But I also would slightly complicate the picture by saying, you know, we live in these highly technical, highly stratified, highly professionalized and class-divided setups. But that is not, I guess I come from a discipline and a training where that that material objective kind of picture of how the world is not the only factor in creating our reality. That there is also there are also other environmental, religious, spiritual aspects, and I don't want to kind of take that direction and say that, oh, I believe. I mean, but I think we can also broaden the talk to think of like utopia as being, you know, we might have our utopia where we overthrow those structures of power, but we have to also recognize that there might be another utopia. Like in one of the discussions earlier we had about utopia, someone mentioned that for much of the world is already going in the direction of Elon Musk's utopia. And there might be other indigenous utopias or queer utopias or Christian utopias that are being constructed as well. So I do, my personal position is yes, I also identify as someone who sees capital as the primary way of organizing society, but I'm also aware that we live in a world where other viewpoints and other frameworks for understanding the world are possible. So we're always engaging with communities and people who don't share those assumptions. Yeah. And that's okay, that we're not better than them if they don't share our analysis, I would say, on a more kind of culturally relativist point. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
There we go.
Thank you very much for your talk. Okay, I think we go in a break now.